Thousands of Chadians attended the state funeral of the long-serving President Idriss Déby in the capital N'Djamena today. President Deby was killed earlier this week during a clash with rebels. Among the foreign leaders in attendance was the French President Emmanuel Macron, for whom Chad is a key ally in the fight against rebels in the region. Meanwhile, rebel forces say their command center was hit in an airstrike overnight.
Thousands of residents and foreign dignitaries assembled in the main square of Chad's capital on Friday to mourn its President Idriss Déby, whose death this week on the front line against rebel forces has thrown the country into crisis. French President Emmanuel Macron was among them, telling the crowd he wouldn't allow anyone to threaten Chad. Earlier that day, Macron joined regional leaders to meet the man now leading Chad, Déby's son, General Mahamat Idriss Déby, over how to move forward. The rebels say their advance on the capital now sits about 200 to 300 kilometers out. And while they say they ordered a temporary ceasefire for the funeral to proceed, they also say their command center was hit by an airstrike overnight in an attempt to kill their own leader. The French government's defending the move by Déby's son to dissolve parliament and take control of the military as justified by what it calls exceptional circumstances. Political opposition groups say it's a coup and are calling for civil disobedience.
Well, to discuss this issue further, we are now joined by Counter-terrorism and Organised Crime expert David Otto via Skype. A very good evening to you, Mr. Otto. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thank you.
Well, the late the late Chadian leader, beg your pardon, has been laid to rest. So what's your impressions of how the entire process went?
I think, first of all, it's a very sad situation for Chadians. The man that was equally seen as the custodian of Chad, the custodian of the security situation in the Sahel, in the Lake Chad basin, and also as a buffer zone to the incursions from Libya, is now gone. The circumstances under which he died is still very unclear. And, the dynamics, to which his burial took place, speaks a lot, because, this is an interim government that literally, carried out a coup d'etat, and yet they are being supported by France, for reasons which they term, to maintain stability. The same French government that in 2019 had actually aided the Idriss Déby government against the rebels, saying that, they were preventing a coup d'etat. So the standards are very controversial. And the presence of the French president in Chad doesn't seem to me as a mourning process, but rather a consolidation of French position in the region.
Well, we've seen rebels earlier on in the week warning foreign leaders who wanted to come to the funeral not to do so because they will launch more attacks. But we haven't seen that, or at least we haven't heard reports of such attacks on these foreign leaders. Is it an indication that the rebels' powers have dissipated, or their influence has dissipated?
I think there is one thing to issue a warning that you launch an attack. And most often, when rebel groups do that, they know that mitigation circumstances, measures could be put in place to stop that from happening. But this could also be a strategy by the rebels, to prevent other interested countries, from, coming into the mix. Now, it is very shocking and surprising that despite that threat, I remember that a few days before the death of Idriss Déby was declared, the United States had warned all its diplomats, but also the United Kingdom, to leave Chad. Now, for the president of France to attend the funeral and other leaders, it tells you that, there is some kind of, defense mechanism which these countries have that others who did not attend do not have. And this is down to access. This is down to geopolitical strategy. So I believe that the rebels do not, have the kind of capacity to really make threats unless, they have some support that they are relying on. And, I think they do, taking into consideration that they managed to kill the president according to the military.
Well, the French leader, Emmanuel Macron, we've seen him earlier on saying that Idriss Déby was such a brave friend. And he leaned over to the casket and he said, I'm going to quote him verbatim, he said that you lived as a soldier, you died as a soldier with weapons in hand. You gave your life for Chad in defense of its citizens. Should we read much into the level of interest that European countries have on African countries given its vast mineral resources?
Chad is a very strategic country for France. It sits in a very, a powerful position just in between the Lake Chad and also, again, as I mentioned earlier on, in the Sahel. Chad protects, incursions from Libya. It's always been that way. They have very strong influence in Central African Republic, but also, along Sudan. So I think, the fact that Idriss Déby is now gone, leaves so much to be desired. His relationship with France, before he died, wasn't very smooth, compared to the kind of relationship he enjoyed in 2019 when the rebels calling themselves I think the Union of Resistance Forces, the UFR, attacked and launched an attack on N'Djamena. So I think what we see here is President Macron, consolidating again the French position. The Operation Barkhane under the French forces is one of the most powerful, has one of the most powerful presence in the Sahel. And, Chad has always provided a strong basis for that. But under Idriss Déby, before he died, those relationships, the relationship between France and Chad wasn't at its best. So I think what we see now is France, trying to reposition itself under perhaps the new regime. And I don't think the son of Idriss Déby will succeed as much as his father did. But, the constitution has now been overthrown, and perhaps, we can see something different in future.
As you say that France is now repositioning itself to embrace the new regime, how likely will there be a shift, in the relationship, in the bilateral relations between the two countries?
I think that there will be challenges, because, again, the opposition parties are not comfortable with the fact that the constitution has been overthrown. The person who had to take over from Idriss Déby should have been the head of the National Assembly, but that did not happen. Also, the constitution stipulates that in order for you to become president of Chad, you must be 45 years plus. The General Mahamat, also known as Kaka, who is the son of Idriss Déby, he's just 37 years old. So he's still very young. And by the constitution, he's not supposed to be the leader of the country. But now the constitution has been overthrown. There has been a coup d'etat. The president is now dead. The rebels are advancing and saying that, they will continue to advance. And France is promising the interim, military junta that it will protect Chad. Now, what does that mean? It means that, France is literally saying, if you don't lean on us, then you've got the rebels breathing down your neck. So I think what we see here is some kind of a pressure point that Chad is experiencing with France. Now, they have very little choice, perhaps, but to lean towards France. in order for them to survive. So it's geopolitics at its best. And I think, this is some kind of a recolonization 101.
Well, opposition leaders have condemned his succession of Mohamed Deby to the highest office in the land as a coup. But is it really a coup? Would you categorize it as such?
I think it's nothing short but a coup. If the president died, according to as the military says, he died in the front line after sustaining a bullet, that doesn't call for the military to take over power. I mean, there is a very clear constitutional line of succession. And if the military has taken over power because the president, was killed in the front line, and they're giving reasons that it is because they're experiencing rebels coming from Libya and, coming into the country, that is not a good excuse. I mean, I think what should have happened is, the constitution should have been maintained. The head of the National Assembly should have been in charge, and the military could still play the role that it plays in defending the territorial integrity of the country. It makes no sense for the military to say that, they took power because, they wanted to, or they want to prevent the rebels from coming into N'Djamena. That doesn't make, any operational sense. So I think it's a coup. And that is what it should be called. And I think the French government or any other government or even the African Union should not support that because it creates a very bad precedent to other African countries.
And what would the African Union say about or react to this?
I think it's down to the African Union to ensure that there are no double standards. We saw the implication of the coup that happened in Mali. It was condemned by the African Union. It was condemned by ECOWAS. Of course, it made no practical difference, because the military junta still remains, in power, albeit appointing civilians who were previously, men in uniform. So I think what the African Union needs to do is to, play the role that it's supposed to play, and make sure that it is the custodian of national or regional or continental security in Africa. It should not be a case where African countries are being pressured to take certain positions depending on how Western countries are interested in one country or the other. So African Union needs to stand up, but I don't think they've got what it takes, to really make a difference in this case.
I think not much is said about how he died and the manner he died. But the big question is, why was he at the forefront, at the battle lines?
I think one of the arguments has always been, I remember just a couple of months, less than a year ago, when Chadian forces were attacked in the northern Chad, in a region known as Boma. Idriss Déby went, to the front line, but he did not go to the battlefront, which is, people have to differentiate between that. You go to the front line and to a very secured environment and talk to your commanders, and give them instructions and listen to their challenges. It is very doubtful that Idriss Déby himself, would be in the battlefront and handling weapons, to engage with the rebels. It's very unlikely. It's never happened before. But what you must understand is that the source of this information, in the way that Idriss Déby died, comes solely from the military. And it is the same military that has organized a coup, against the constitution. So I think if you have to believe the military, then you've got to believe them with a very large pinch of salt. So, I think, it would be, very difficult, considering the fact that a coup has occurred, to believe that, he died as a result of engaging in battle. It's very doubtful. I think it's more or less an assassination.
I mean, it's so bizarre, considering that Chadian forces are considered the most effective in the fight against Boko Haram, in the fight against Islamic State, and as well as Al-Qaeda in the region. But then how would that affect the fight against rebels in the region, in particular in Chad?
I think, it depends on what kind of strategy that the General Muhammad, who is in charge, puts in place. But of course, as you're much aware, Chad has played a very significant role in protecting rebels from coming into Chad itself. But also, they've done a lot in helping countries like Nigeria to fight against the Boko Haram insurgency in all the islands along the Chadian borders. They've also been very powerful in shouldering some of the challenges that Niger Republic has had. So I think Chad has played a very significant role. They've been there under the G5 Sahel. They are the only country that was also under the multinational joint task force. So they played that double role because they have very good fighters. But I think what is going to happen now that Idriss Déby is no longer there, all these countries have to figure out how to protect their borders. And I think, it becomes a lot more disturbing because none of these countries, was prepared or thought about life after Idriss Déby. And now that that has happened, we are still to see if the son can be as powerful or as strategic as the father was. But it's a family affair. And I think, all that is going on in Chad, today is all about the struggle for power. And, we will see much more of that, in the coming weeks and months.